Welcome to the reproductive system lecture. This is going to be based on the anatomy of male and female reproductive systems. And do not forget that I'll let you know which of these illustrations are going to be key for the lab exam. That's going to be coming up, I think it's after spring break. So make sure to take note of which illustrations I think are good for lab exam material. This is a great illustration for the lab exam. Had we been in the lab actually, the lab room has a model that looks exactly like this mid-sagittal section of the male reproductive system. So this illustration is wonderful for many reasons. It shows you the external anatomy of the male's reproductive system as well as all of the internal anatomy. So we're going to go over all of these structures one by one, and we'll start from the back and work our way to the front. So in the back you see the large intestine here. There's cross sections of the large intestine there too. It turns into the colon and then the rectum and anus. In front of that, you're going to have a structure that's an open storage facility almost, but this is for urine. So this is going to be the urinary bladder. And the urinary bladder allows urine to leave out of this opening that leaves out of the penis. Now, this whole thing right here, it does have two names. The portion that's in the penis and it goes all the way up to maybe like the pubic bone here, we call that the urethra. The rest of this structure that's over here, kind of moving towards the purple tube, this is called the ejaculatory duct. So ejaculatory duct and the urethra will converge together right here in this white region. This white region is the prostate gland. So in the middle of the prostate gland and sort of behind it, you have convergence of the urethra and the ejaculatory duct. The urethra will carry through it urine as well as semen. This ejaculatory duct, if we follow it around, it's going to go around the pubic bone and down into the scrotum, which is this sac. The scrotum holds within it the testes, and the testes are where you produce testosterone as well as sperm. This structure that's laying on the testes is called the epididymis, and it connects up to the tube-like structure called the ductus deferens. It is also termed the vas deferens, V-A-S deferens. So the vas deferens goes up and around, turns into the ejaculatory duct right here, and that converges into the urethra and out the penis. So the penis is going to be this muscular, very vascular tissue, and that's going to be part of the external genitalia. And then the tip of the structure is going to be called the glands of the penis. And again, this is where you're going to have urine coming out as well as semen. The two other structures we haven't mentioned is this little purple structure behind the prostate and the bladder. This is called the seminal vesicle. And then down below here kind of looks like an espresso bean. This is called the bulbourethral gland. So for men, they have three main glands that create secretions to help sperm survive, and that's going to be again the prostate gland, bulbourethral gland, and seminal vesicle. We will talk about the functions of all of these in just a second. So male genitalia, as with female genitalia, they have external and internal structures. For males, the external structures, meaning the only structures you can see, is the penis and the scrotum. For females, their external structure is going to be like labia or clitoris. For males, the internal genitalia are things you cannot physically see, like the testes themselves. So if I go back a slide, you can see the scrotum externally, but you do not see the testes. Now, internally as well, you have that epididymis, the vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, and urethra. These are all written in order of where the sperm travels from. So from the testes, the sperm goes to the epididymis, then to the vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, and out the urethra. Along the way of this pathway, you have those three glands we mentioned. They're considered exocrine glands because they don't make hormone. They make enzymatic and nutrient-rich fluids that supply the sperm with what they need to survive and get to the egg. That includes the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland. So let's talk about just the external genitalia, specifically the penis, because there are some structures inside of here that you're going to need to know the names of. There's an illustration coming right after this slide. So the penis is made of two main regions, the shaft of it and then the glands, which we said was the tip of the penis. And then internally, inside of the penis, you have the urethra. And we said that not only does urine come out of here, but semen comes out of here as well. And then you have structures that are highly vascular. There's two structures called corpora cavernosa, and then there's one structure called the corpus spongiosum. The corpora cavernosa are going to be behind the urethra, and then the corpus spongiosum is going to be the tissue that surrounds the urethra, preventing it from collapsing. So let's just look at the cross section. Here's the urethra, where urine and semen come out. Around it, you have this tissue called the corpus spongiosum. When the penis is erect, it's a high-pressure system in here, and that could potentially clog off the urethra, preventing any kind of ejaculation. So to prevent that from happening, you have the corpus spongiosum keeping that urethra open. On the two sides that are what looks here superior to the urethra, you have large arteries, one right there and one right there. These are called deep arteries. Around the deep arteries, you have more capillary beds, and we know that through arteries and capillary beds, you have blood flow. These tissues here and here are called corpora cavernosa. So if you wanted to circle corpora cavernosa, and the key word that associates with this is vascularization. The key thing happening there is blood supply. Then you can circle corpus spongiosum, and you can write prevent urethra collapsing. In this external view, you see a lot of vascularization here. You do see the glans penis. The prepuce is the portion that some people get circumcised off. So underneath it would be the glans penis. And then internally, again, that vascularization. And then underneath it all is going to be the corpus spongiosum, which contains inside, again, the urethra. Now, behind the penis is going to be the scrotum. This does not mean testes or testicles. Scrotum is just the sac, or the piece of skin and muscle that surrounds each testis. The scrotum is important because it has the ability to contract and relax. It can pull the testes closer to the abdomen or drop them further away from the abdomen. And the key thing here is temperature regulation. The closer the testes are to the abdomen, the warmer they're going to be. The further they are from the abdomen, the cooler they're going to be. And the thing about temperature regulation in the testes is that all testes need to be kept at 34 degrees Celsius. Human body temperature is about 36 to 37 degrees Celsius. So the testes have to be kept cooler. This is because sperm will not survive in body temperature. They must be kept 2 or 3 degrees cooler than the rest of the body. So what is going to allow the scrotum to pull the testes up or drop them down? Well, 2 layers of smooth muscle. One layer is called the dartos muscle. Another layer is called the cremaster muscle. The cremaster muscle, this one is the one that acts like a net, holding the testes and surrounding their entire structure. The dartos muscle is more like a rope attached to the top of each testis. We're going to see each of these pictures, and then I'm going to use this terminology down here with this next illustration. So, penis, behind the penis is going to be the scrotum. That's the testes. That's the epididymis, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is all the vascularization here. And then the two structures of muscle are going to be the cremaster muscle here. Like I said, it's like a rope holding onto the top of it. And then surrounding the entire testy, you have the dartos muscle. Yes, it's a little bit of a lighter color, but it still is considered smooth muscle. So the cremaster muscle, if you notice, comes all the way down and surrounds each testy. I know it's kind of, it looks cut here, but it's this entire pink tissue. On this side, you see it again. The cremaster muscle is this pink one. It comes around and it sits like a net surrounding the entire testy. In front of that is the dartos muscle. So you could say that the cremaster muscle is deeper than the dartos muscle. Now, when the cremaster muscle and the dartos muscle contract, they pull the testes up towards the abdomen and they shrivel the scrotum to prevent heat loss. Here's how this works. The more shriveled this skin is, the less surface area it has to lose heat. The more you expand skin, you expose it to the external environment, causing it to lose heat. So depending on the temperature of the testes, if they're cold, you can pull them up to warm them up. And if they're too warm, you drop them down to cool them off. And again, it's these two muscles here that do it. So the testes, they themselves have a good amount of anatomy. So testes' job is to make testosterone and sperm. And inside of each testy, there's this noodle-looking structure we call seminiferous tubules. It is inside of these tubules that you actually make the sperm. The tubules are made of a specialized cell called Sertoli cells. These are the cells that make sperm. And we have a term for making sperm. It's called spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis is the process of producing sperm using Sertoli cells. We're going to look at these cells up close in just a moment. Outside of the seminiferous tubules, you have another specialized cell called an interstitial cell, sometimes called a Leydig cell. I will accept both answers for a lab practical question. The interstitial cells are found outside of the seminiferous tubules, in between all of the looping of them. These cells do not make sperm. They make testosterone. And this is what it looks like. Here's the testy. Here's that noodle-like structure we call seminiferous tubules. Inside of the yellow tubule, you will have Sertoli cells. Outside of the tubule, in between these spaces, is where you're going to have your interstitial cells. So in this region, you're making both sperm and testosterone, but using different cells. Once you produce the sperm, they go into this net-like structure called the ready testy. They're converging all here before they go into their storage, which is in the epididymis. The epididymis is still made of seminiferous tubules, but they are clustered and they are compacted, and these seminiferous tubules do not make any new sperm. They just store and allow the produced sperm to mature. From here, the sperm will travel out and they will shoot out of the vas deferens, and that's only during ejaculation. So let's take one seminiferous tubule and cut it in half and look at just a cross section of it. So here's a cross section of one seminiferous tubule. You have your Sertoli cells, which are going to be all of these purple cells here. And then you're going to have these purple cells producing these dark purple structures called germ cells. This is a precursor cell of a sperm. This will eventually turn into the little tiny dots here. Those are your sperm. Now, I just want you to notice in this illustration, it's not calling them Sertoli cells. It's calling them sustentacular cells. I will never call them sustentacular cells. I will always call them Sertoli cells. So the Sertoli cells are inside the seminiferous tubule and they produce sperm in the middle. Outside of the seminiferous tubule, you see structures here and here. These structures outside, these are the interstitial cells. Those interstitial cells are what make testosterone. Now, here's the deal with testosterone and sperm. You cannot make viable sperm without testosterone. So although I did say the interstitial cells do not produce sperm, without their proper function, they won't be able to make testosterone. And without testosterone, you will not be able to make proper sperm. So it is essential that both Sertoli cells and the interstitial cells work properly. So we've made the sperm now, we've made the testosterone, and now it's going to be pushed into the epididymis. This coiling of tubes is the epididymis, and it sits on the head of the testes. This is where all the sperm mature, and this is where they wait for ejaculation. Once ejaculation occurs, the sperm will shoot down and force itself around into the vas deferens. So again, testes here, epididymis here. Ejaculation causes the sperm to push out of the vas deferens. I want you to take notice of the terms that I'm using. Notice that I use the word semen when talking about this region, but I'm using the word sperm to talk about this region. Sperm is literally just a sperm cell. So testes make sperm, store them in the epididymis, and the sperm shoots out of the vas deferens and goes into the ejaculatory duct. Once it enters into here, it's going to mix with the fluids that are made by the seminal vesicle, bulbourethral gland, and prostate gland. When sperm cells mix with all of that fluid, it turns into a fluid called semen. So please, please do not get this wrong on the exam. Sperm is just the cell name. Semen is a mixture of sperm with all the fluids made from the 3 glands. We're going to talk about those fluids in a moment. So the first gland I want to talk about is the seminal vesicle. I'm going to go back a slide just to point it out to you. This guy right there. It's found behind the bladder. So the seminal vesicle is going to be found behind the bladder, and there's 2 of them, one on each side of the bladder, and they're going to make a fluid called seminal fluid. I talk about this one first because this vesicle, although if you look, is pretty small compared to the prostate gland. This little vesicle makes up 60% of the semen volume. It is what makes semen alkaline. Alkaline means basic in pH. It has to be basic because a woman's vaginal environment is acidic. So when a basic fluid mixes with an acidic environment, it neutralizes it. Seminal fluid also contains fructose. It ends in ose, which means it's a type of sugar. Fructose is a sugar that gives sperm the energy in the form of ATP to, I guess you could say, wiggle its flagella and make its way all the way to the egg. So sperm and seminal fluid mix together in the ejaculatory duct. So this right here is the ejaculatory duct. This is where sperm and seminal fluid mix together. From there, it's going to make its way through the prostate gland, and the prostate gland is going to be below the bladder, and this is going to make about 33% of the semen volume. The main job of this guy is to make enzymes that are going to kind of help the sperm move in and through the vagina. The last gland, the bulbourethral gland, the smallest one, is going to be two tiny glands, again, below each of the regions of the prostate, and it's going to make a very sticky, thick, clear mucus to mix with all the semen and sperm. This is going to allow the semen to stick in the vaginal wall to increase the chances of fertilization and pregnancy. So again, sperm comes here, mixes with seminal fluid in the ejaculatory duct, then goes through the prostate gland and passes right by the bulbourethral gland. And from this point, right when it goes past this like pubic bone lining, it's going to be called semen, and it's ready to go and make its way to the egg. Now transitioning to the female reproductive system. External genitalia include the labia. There's two labia, majora and minora. Some manuals, like I think your lab manual calls it labia major and labia minor. I'm fine with all those answers. Then it has the clitoris. All three of these are going to be considered the external genitalia, and together it's called the vulva. The internal genitalia includes the ovaries, which make eggs, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, and the vagina. So this is what it looks like. So we'll start at the large intestine again. Large intestine, anus, so for fecal matter. In front of that, it's not a bladder. This is the uterus. The uterus is held onto the internal wall of the pelvic region with this ligament. This is called the round ligament. This just holds the uterus in place. On the sides of the uterus, you have this tube coming out. It shows one in this picture, but there's two of them. This is called the fallopian tube, also known as the uterine tube. I will accept both answers. And it attaches to the ovary. These little finger-like projections are called fimbriae. So the uterus is made up of a few layers. The largest layer here is this muscle layer. This is called the myometrium, because what does myo mean? It means muscle. The inner layer is called the endometrium. This is what sheds off during a woman's menstrual cycle. The opening to the uterus is called the cervix, and that opens up into the vaginal canal. So we have anus, and then the vaginal canal, and then in front of that you have the urethra, which only allows urine to pass through, and it connects to the bladder. In front of that, you have this muscle here called the clitoris. Surrounding it, you have the labia minor and you have the labia major. The purpose of the labia is really to protect both of these openings. This urethra is only 2 to 3 centimeters. It's very, very short, which means if any kind of bacteria gets into the opening of the urethra, it's probably going to get into the uterus, into the bladder if it's not cleaned out, and that can cause a UTI. The vaginal canal also should be protected from any kind of external pathogen. If we just look at the uterus by itself, and also I forgot to mention, this is a great illustration for the lab practical, as is this one. So again, the vaginal canal to the uterus, and the uterus connects to the vaginal canal in this region we call the cervix. The cervix is the external tissue. The actual opening into the uterus is called the external os. It opens up to the cervical canal, then to the internal os. So external os, cervical canal, internal os, and then you have the cervix. The cervix, again, is made up of an inner lining called the endometrium, the muscle lining called the myometrium, and it has a few different structures in and of itself. The dome at the top of the uterus is called the fundus. The majority of the uterus is called the body, and the opening of the uterus is called the cervix. From the left and the right sides, you have the fallopian tubes, and these fallopian tubes have sections. The first section is the isthmus, then it's the ampulla, and then it's called the infundibulum. Again, the finger-like projections are called fimbriae, and they open up to each of the ovaries. Now, this ovary shows you a cross-section of a developing ovum, which is an egg, until it reaches the end. It gets released, and it's going to get suctioned into the infundibulum. So again, here's the ovary, and inside each of the ovaries, you have about 200,000 primordial follicles. These little tiny follicles that have the ability to turn into an egg. Of course, they're not all going to turn into eggs within a woman's lifetime, but if it's chosen, the primordial follicle turns into a primary follicle, then a secondary follicle, eventually growing and allowing for ovulation. The word ovulation, all this means, we don't need to make it very complicated, is the release of a mature egg from the ovary. I'm going to go back a slide. Here we go. Ovulation, release of this mature egg from the ovary. This egg doesn't just float away. It goes into the fallopian tube. And this process of ovulation happens every 28 days. So every 28 days, you're going to have an egg waiting here for a sperm. If sperm doesn't come and fertilize the egg to cause implantation, the inner lining of the uterus is going to shed, and that's what causes the menstrual cycle. You'll learn more about this in physiology, but for now, this is just the basic anatomy. So one thing about the fallopian tube that makes them unique is that all these regions right here, they're lined with cilia. Why do you think you would need to line the inside of each fallopian tube with cilia? Think of what the cilia does. If I was in class, I would do the movement with my arms. So if you remember, what does cilia do? And why would you need cilia in fallopian tubes? Well, eggs are different than sperm. Sperm have flagella, like tails that allow them to move. Eggs do not. So the egg is going to get stuck if there's no way to help push it through. So the fallopian tubes have ciliated columnar epithelium to help wave those cilia and move the egg through the fallopian tube. The other interesting fact is that once the egg is released from the ovary, it waits right here. A lot of people think, and this is not true, but I'll tell you what people think and then I'll tell you what really happens. People think the egg gets released from the ovary, goes all the way through, and waits for a sperm in the uterus. That is wrong. The egg gets released from the ovary and waits right over here. Where this red clicker is, it waits here. The sperm needs to be released into the uterus. The sperm itself needs to swim through the fallopian tube and find the egg. So essentially, the egg is playing hard to get and staying at the end of the fallopian tube. And if the sperm is able and healthy enough, it's going to make its way to the egg and fertilize it. And eventually that fertilized zygote will get pushed by the cilia into the uterus and implant inside the uterus. So that uterus, we talked about some of the structures. We've got the cervix, which is the opening. We've got the body, which is the majority of it. And then we've got the fundus, which is the dome at the top. And that dome at the top, right here, is the fundus. It connects to both fallopian tubes. The walls of the uterus, made up of 3 layers. We talked about the first 2 so far. The endometrium, which is the internal lining. The endometrium is highly vascular, which is why during a menstrual cycle it looks like a woman is bleeding. It's blood, but it's because you're shedding off the endometrial tissue layer, and that tissue layer has a lot of vascularization in it. This is the layer that thickens up during the menstrual cycle, and eventually this is the layer that develops into the placenta if pregnancy occurs. Behind that is the myometrium. Myo means muscle. This is the really thick muscle layer, and it's made of smooth muscle. and this is what contracts during child labor. The last layer is the perimetrium. This is the outermost layer. It's not a muscle. It's just a connective tissue layer, and it's elastic, and it holds everything in place in terms of fallopian tubes, the cervical os, the fundus of the uterus. It's all covered with the perimetrium. So then below the uterus, you're going to have that cervical os connecting to the external world, and that external world is connected by the vagina. The vagina is going to be where we have release of menstrual flow. It's going to be where we have birth from, and it's going to be the entrance of the sperm. There's no urine coming out of this region. Urine only comes out of the urethra for females. So females and males are a little bit different in the fact that for males, their urethra is used for urine and semen. For females, the urethra is used for just urine. The entrance and exit for sperm and baby is going to be the vagina. And that is the entire reproductive system lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions on it. If I missed any pictures, just know that all the illustrations from this PowerPoint are very good to use for lab practical. So be sure you're using them while doing the labs and while going over the list. And I will post your next PowerPoint on Thursday.